This is Rochelle Hood. I'm SSON's Global Head of Customer Analytics and Research and serving as today's moderator for Day 3 of SS Week Digital North America. I'm going to run through a couple of quick logistics and then hand off to our chairman, our digital chairman of this event. So logistically, a few things to be aware of. On the right-hand side of your screen, you're going to see a control panel. Two very important things there. We'd like the session to be as interactive as possible. We want to hear from as many of you as we can. So please use the question box to present questions anytime throughout the session. I will let you know that as the panel is having a discussion, we have a couple of built-in times to pause and take your questions. And then, of course, we will also do so at the very end of the panel discussion. Also, there's a chat box. That's going to be important to you for two reasons. First of all, if you have problems, issues, you can't hear, you have any kind of question to do with the session as a whole, Lisa, who's serving as our webinar coordinator today, will be actively monitoring that, and she will assist you. In addition to that, the chat box will give you some ripe and valuable information. We're going to be doing live tweeting during this session, so there will be information about how to join in on the live tweet and follow along there. We'll also have information about the digital gift bag that you're going to get, which not only includes information about the recordings of today's sessions and how to get the downloads of those, but you'll also be getting some bonus giveaways that are only available in the gift bag, not even available during the week. And then thirdly, we will remind you that we have an opportunity for you to hear the takeaways, not only from this session, but from the entire conference that our chairman will be delivering at 3 p.m. today. And that information will be provided to you also in the chat box. So with those quick logistics out of the way, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome back to the digital stage our chairman for the digital event, who's also been our live chair at the physical event in Orlando since 2012, Scott Dement, partner at Scott Madden. Brad, over to you.
Thank you, Rochelle. And yes, it's good to transition from live chairman to digital chairman. And welcome everybody to Day 3, Session 2 of the first annual Shared Service Week Digital North America. And good evening if you're joining from Europe, or good late evening if you're joining from Asia or the Pacific. I understand we've got a lot of participants from around the world joining, which is great. You're in for a great session coming up. Essentially what we've done is pulled some of the hottest presentations, the hottest speakers from the Shared Service Week back in March, which had almost 1,000 attendees and practitioners from around the world. As Rochelle mentioned, I've been chairing that conference for quite a while now, and have noticed a very distinct transition into advanced technology discussion. Still some basics in shared service and GBS principles, but you know, we're showing at Scott Madden about a 300% increase in artificial intelligence investment, about a 40% RPA, robotic process automation adoption rate. That's adoption, not just thinking about it. And more in line with today's session, we've got about 43% of companies operating in a global model, and 81% of those operating in a global business service model. So drastic changes in technology that could affect our footprint, and a good transition into our next session. So we've got a panelist discussion on global standardization, and I'm just going to turn the mic over to Anshul Varma, the managing director at KPMG, to moderate this session. Anshul, I'll let you introduce the panel. It's all yours.
Thank you, Brad. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Anshul Varma. I'm a managing director at KPMG's Shared Services and Outsourcing Advisory practice. Been doing shared services GBS for roughly 20 years, first in industry and now as an advisor. KPMG's management consulting, and specifically our shared services and outsourcing advisory group, helps clients transform business services to improve value, increase agility, create sustainable performance. We have a global team of more than 1,000 professionals who blend insight and operational experience to help our clients across all phases of their GBS journey, from strategy to design to implementation and optimization. I am delighted to have the opportunity to moderate this panel and introduce you to an extremely knowledgeable and well-rounded group of panelists. Our first panelist is Richard Schmidt, Richard is the VP for Finance and Global Shared Services, Strategic Sourcing, Travel, and Business Processes at Hitachi Data Systems. Richard is in charge of the Group Finance Shared Services, including controllership and global process owners. Viral Chaya is Director of Global Business Services at General Motors. He was previously driving operational excellence for Bank of America's GPO processes. He was also the global operating leader for 2 of Genpact's key clients, leading delivery organizations across 3 countries, 7 locations, and 7 product lines. Rodney Burton is Senior Vice President, Global Business Services at Celestica. Celestica's GBS organization is in its 3rd year of operation, performing 5 end-to-end processes, supporting clients across the globe. Prior to joining Celestica in 2014, Rodney was a partner managing director at Accenture. Our final panelist today is my colleague, Bob Cecil. Bob has extensive experience across a broad cross-section of industries in helping companies improve the delivery of their general and administrative business services. For those of you who have been to SSON events before, you are likely to have run into him at one of those events. He is one of the industry leaders in promoting the trend from shared services to GBS. Welcome all. As Brad said, these are probably very interesting times for shared service and GBS organizations in particular. When we surveyed, KPMG did a CEO survey, that identified 3 areas that CEOs are most concerned about: disruptive technologies, impact to their business models of today, and how quickly or not their organizations are responding. So my first set of questions and the first topic of discussion, and Rodney, I will start with you, is what do these disruptive technologies mean for your GBS operating models today? And how are you using these technologies and the changes that are coming with them to provide greater value through the GBS organization?
Thank you, Anshul, and it's a great question. And as I reflect on the question, what's really interesting is when one thinks about disruptive technologies and the pace of change of technology what may be disruptive today may not be disruptive in the future. And certainly, when I think about what we are doing, we're embracing new technologies all the time, and what I consider disruptive may not be considered disruptive by others. So at the heart of our technology strategy at this point in time, for our enabling technologies, and we separate enabling technologies from our operational technologies, which are sort of our core systems, we have 3 key focuses. Focus number 1 is around CRM, customer relationship management, so that we enable to deliver a professional experience to everybody who interacts with our GBS organization. Focus number 2 is process mining technology, which allows us to really track the end-to-end process and the pitfalls within that end-to-end process. And focus number 3 is RPA, robotic process automation. And these are our current focuses that we believe are really going to help us through this next generation of our GBS organization, the next 2 to 3 years. We recognize beyond that, artificial intelligence is on the horizon. We definitely recognize we need to get proficient in our core 3, and we are better at some and the learning curve on others. Artificial intelligence would follow naturally when these are functioning as we expect that they will. And artificial intelligence and other related technologies would be on our horizon at that point in time. Lastly, what I would just call out, certainly, one talks about the cloud in the space as well, and we've embraced the cloud as much as we feel comfortable. And for most of our non-core systems, we're very, very comfortable to work in a cloud-based environment. So are we embracing technology? I would say yes, we are. Are these the disruptive technologies of today? I'd say some of them probably are, but as I said, with the speed of change, they may not be so disruptive in the very near term as well.
Fantastic. Bob, if I can direct a follow-on question to you, how are you seeing your clients respond to these changes? As Rodney said, these technologies are coming thick and fast. What are ways in which, what strategies are GBS organizations developing or putting in place to respond, and how is this changing their operating models?
Yeah, good question. I mean, if you looked at it, I would say GBS organizations are predominantly trying to follow the strategies of the company as a whole. And the company as a whole, I'd say you can put them into probably a couple different buckets. One is more of a defensive strategy. And if we were really honest, we would probably say most of our clients have a defensive strategy, which is predominantly oriented around cost takeout and cost flexibility and adaptability to changing, making your cost structure more variable to changing business conditions. I was with a company yesterday, one of my clients, and they're using the word grow without growing, meaning that they want to grow the top line, but they don't want to grow their SG&A costs at the same level. It's not necessarily the most glamorous strategy, but it probably is the most consistent strategy around, particularly cost takeout. A lot of what Rodney was talking about, you could have, in Orlando, you would have been avoid an RPA vendor, right? You trip over them if you were turning left or right in the session. So they're focusing very heavily on not just RPA, robotics process automation, but other service automation that tend to be less of the big bang ERP and more the enabling technologies that Rodney was talking about for cost reduction. I mean, just to give you, maybe it might be helpful for the audience to know, we're working with one client now. We're working a portfolio of 100 use cases on robotics, and I would say next class of digital technology, not all the way up to artificial intelligence. It's got about a $10 million savings, so you can do the math, off of it. You're getting about $100,000 per use case to be able to put in place. And you have to create an overall capability for that. You just don't do a series of use cases. You have a COE and other things to be able to manage that. And then, as Rodney said, probably the biggest one on making your cost structure more variable is the cloud. We've seen a real big uptick in the HR space. We're seeing more and more now finance, procurement, and then some of the specialty areas like IT service management really picking up in the cloud space to make your cost structure more variable. The second strategy is more of an offensive strategy. Fewer companies doing that. GBS organizations probably aspire to support these strategies. If you looked at how are they supporting an offensive strategy, it's more about revenue growth, customer growth, things like that. Data and analytics is probably the biggest place that you see GBS organizations jumping into that. Most start with analytics for their own operations, but I would say a growing number are building enterprise data and analytics capabilities. They don't do that on their own. They do it in conjunction with a number of others. And they're building out a more robust way in which to help make better business decisions around business outcomes. And then I would say the other one, and probably echoes a little bit of what Rodney was saying, is in the CRM type of space, which is around customer-centric technologies such as mobile experiences. And a lot about linking now, you hear this omni sort of experience, front, middle, and back office, and how do you apply those technologies to create a more seamless customer experience, increase customer loyalty, and hopefully, therefore, increase revenue.
Fantastic. Rodney, if I could come back to you with a follow-on question. As you talked about CRM, process mining, RPA, kind of the technologies that you're already dealing with. As you're going down that path, how are you having to fundamentally rethink your GBS value proposition? So how are you thinking about things like your shoring strategy, service portfolio, talent? What, if anything, is changing in the way you think about how GBS adds value to your customers, especially as you start to go down the path with these technologies and these changes?
Well, I think fundamentally, we set up our GBS organization based on process, and so we've set up our full structure around end-to-end processes, and I believe our experience has shown that the technologies has very much enabled that, and it's very much aligned with the process thinking. So CRM we certainly use as a way of inbounding work and transactions, and then certainly monitoring them through to completion, and so it tracks the full end-to-end process, and we can track performance of those. The data mining fits in well one more time because it allows us to assess the effectiveness of the processes that we're performing, and the RPA is going to add this additional dimension. This is the one that is newest in our, if you like, in our portfolio right now of technologies, which is really going to enable us to speed up our processes, but also provide a lot more auditability, et cetera, of our processes. When you talk about how it's changing our organization, it's very evident to me, and I say to my leadership team as well, is that we're going to start to see a shift in our talent needs and our talent requirements, whether that be in locations. So we operate in lots of low-cost locations, so the offshoring may become no-shoring to a certain extent for certain activities. But then the question that really comes is, what are we doing with folk? One of the things I've committed to is to not reduce headcount as a net result of technology. My favorite line that I use, and I've probably heard it somewhere, so I'm not going to claim to have been the author of this, is we're trying to take the robot out of the person. And so we're replacing robotic tasks that people are doing. And what it then translates into is people performing higher order work based on value and based on insight. And what's really sort of noticeable to myself is that the folks we have in our respective locations across the globe may or may not be equipped to play those kinds of roles. And so our talent requirements are going to change quite dramatically as we take the robot out of the individual. And our opportunity is to see how we can truly upskill folks and focus them appropriately.
Great. Viral, I'll kind of turn the next question to you first. Both Bob and Rodney talked about data and analytics, and one of the lessons that a number of us have learned along the way is that especially in this digital world, as processes are becoming more and more digital, as you're going up the value chain in your GBS organization, data is the secret sauce. So if you could talk about how you guys at General Motors are evolving your data strategy and capabilities in the GBS organization, what is your plan for embedding analytics on top of that data strategy as a core aspect of your GBS model?
Sure, thanks, Anshul. And you touched upon a couple of points there. So clearly, in order to become a strategic partner to your business stakeholders, the GBS organization would have to evolve beyond the effectiveness and efficiency play or productivity play that it would do well to suffice with for the first 2 or 3 years. GBS at General Motors is a 3.5-year-old organization at this point of time, and middle of last year we realized that we wanted to quickly upscale into being able to govern data and subsequently be able to obviously derive actionable insights using data and data governance. You call it the secret sauce. I'll go further. I'll just call it the plumbing for the house. Without it's not very visible, but it is absolutely essential, very pivotal. That you have plumbing in the house, and similarly, that you have a good data strategy and have effective data governance is absolutely key to be able to get any insights and analytics at all. Because as we know, without data, there would be no insights and no analytics, and the data has to be good data and governed data. So we were at a juncture to make a decision on make or buy, and when we realized that we might not have a lot of ingrained in-house endemic talent around data, we decided to simply go and source great resources from out there in the market who are experts at data and the various elements of data, right? So the data strategy would have 4 elements. Data sourcing and integration. Where is all your data? Get it all together. Data quality. How good is it? Can it be used for the purpose that you want to use it for? Master data management. Where do you recite the data? And then finally, once you have all this, how do you govern the data? And to make sure that all future data meets the quality standards that you have set for that particular data, for it to be perennially used and reused. And for all these elements, our favorite hunting ground, if you want, for talent on data in general was the banks. Banking and pharmaceuticals are a rich resource ground for getting good data professionals, purely because after the Great Recession, the kind of regulatory requirements that banking had, data and data governance and data strategy became table stakes. They became just ticket to play for the banking industry, and obviously for pharmaceutical because of the critical nature of what they do. So we recruited individuals, set up our data strategy and the practice around data governance, data sourcing, integration, data quality, and master data management. And subsequently, we have now beginning to churn some very, very interesting, very good actionable insight, using data strategy. To give you an example, let me quote something that Chuck Stevens, who is our CFO, is very fond of speaking about, and he's spoken about this too. Bloomberg, he spoke about this too, the CFO magazine, and what he talks about is vehicle profitability by VIN, by vehicle identification number. So previously we knew profitability of our product lines, we knew brand profitability, etc. But now, because we've been able to standardize and harmonize all our data elements and can source it in a very structured and qualitative way, we are now in a position to say, for each vehicle, for that particular Buick sold by that dealer with that VIN number in that town, how much money did we make or not make? Because we know that we can now peg to that particular vehicle how much incentives we have, what material cost, what option content, what sales channel, etc. And that lets us, the leadership, take very the most profitable vehicle allocation by market or geography. It enables pricing decision, etc. So absolutely key stuff can be done, and very, very insightful stuff can be done using analytics. But before that, you need to have your data governed, and like I said, plumbing in the house. It's plumbing in the house.
Fantastic. Bob, you talked about data and analytics as an offensive strategy. How are you seeing that play out with your clients in terms of what Viral said, kind of the plumbing of the house to have the data strategy and building analytics on top of that?
First, Viral, I should actually congratulate GM. I would say you're probably ahead of the game for most of the clients in terms of moving from just a data strategy to an analytics strategy. So congratulations on that. It's really encouraging. I mean, some of this can be fact-based. We do this, KPMG does this GBS maturity research study. So we've got over 200 companies we've researched on 10 different dimensions of excellence in GBS. One of those dimensions is data and analytics. It happens to be, just to help the audience here, it happens to be the number one attribute in terms of where companies' aspirations are, in terms of where they want to be relative to where their current performance, and it's the biggest gap. So you can clearly see that people want to be on the analytics journey and adding value to the analytics journey. They're probably, to be honest, are probably struggling some with how to make it happen. To give you a little sense of those who we've worked with who have moved beyond just doing data analytics on behalf of their own GBS organization to really impacting the types of business outcomes Vera was talking about. We have a client, for instance, who did it, and they're really focused very heavily on integrated business planning and how you get forecasting done. They match up marketing and sales with supply chain, things like that. Huge impact on the business for this. But what they had to do to be able to get that in place was, first, they created a master data management, data under governance organization. That was where they focused first. And much like what Vera was talking about, I'll keep it simple in our terms, they had to, capture the data, they had to tag the data, had to have a particular identifier to it, and they had to be able to define the data, because you can call it a certain data element different things for different business units and the like. So they had to make sure that they had those basics in place around it. And you'll see a lot of GBS organizations creating some type of a master data type of an organization. And then they tend to overlay on top of that, they will get it into things like the big terminology now is creating data lakes as opposed to a bunch of disparate individual data pods running around the organization. And then they start to put in place some of the more advanced analytics capability on top of the data modelers, and the data engineers to be able to then do the analytics on top of that. So, but I would say, as Viral said, you have to start with the plumbing of getting data under governance and data under management. That's got to be your starting point, because not just the analytics, some of these other things that Rodney was, for instance, talking about, our basic RPA all the way up to cognitive and artificial intelligence. If you don't have the data in place, you're building it on quicksand.
Absolutely. I think that is the key message from both of you around the fact that you got to get your data strategy right before you can start thinking about adding value with analytics. It's a great insight there. Before I continue with some of the other questions on these topics, there are a couple of audience questions I want to take. And Richard, I'm going to direct these these first couple to you. The question is, what functions has your company adopted under the GBS organization? And can you highlight 2 or 3 key measures of success, qualitative and quantitative, of going to a GBS model?
Great, thank you. Yes, at Hitachi Data Systems, we operate in around 40 countries, and we have our shared service centers in Malaysia, Poland, and India. And we don't have I would say we still have a little bit of a silo approach, although there is a owner of the shared service center in Poland and Malaysia, which is finance, led by finance, and in India it's led by IT. But they provide kind of the infrastructure and the culture for that office. We have a group that I think is very valuable in the company, which is a process improvement group or continuous improvement group, and that group spans all the groups. So it's housed in finance, but it supports HR, it supports IT, and they're really good. You know, they're Six Sigma, they're project management people, and they go through and help improve processes and identify opportunities for efficiency and effectiveness. So I think one of the measures, you asked for 2 or 3, one of the measures would be the ability to process improve, because if you don't have it in an appropriate structure, you lose the ability to process improve. All you've done is moved to a lower cost location, but you haven't gone through the process to centralize, standardize, and improve your processes for efficiency. So one is efficiency measures, and another one would be around reporting and metrics. So in finance at Hitachi Data Systems, we started 10 years ago with a shared service center, and so we have a lot more data and understanding and maturity, and it's very important for us to report on metrics and KPIs really quarterly. We do some monthly, but for the most part, we report out on a quarterly basis on how we're doing on our processes, what kind of costs we're incurring, how efficient we are, how much time to get to be successful in that particular process, how's our customer satisfaction levels, what complaints are we hearing, what broke during the quarter. So that maturity in reporting from an operational perspective. The other groups in GBS also need that same robustness and maturity, and so if you can get that across all your groups, where you have a good infrastructure and a good reporting and monitoring process, then I think you also you achieve one of the objectives of what GBS. So I would say those 2 would be my answer to GBS benefits.
Great. Rodney, if I can direct the same question to you, but with a slightly different twist, again, coming from the audience. In the introduction, I'd mentioned you have 5 end-to-end processes in your GBS organization. So if you could talk to what functions or work you have in the GBS structure, And then what is the value of being in a GBS model that you have seen, is the other audience question.
Okay, and with pleasure. So in terms of functions from which we've, if you like, drawn work, or stated differently, that they've entrusted us to do work on their behalf, work comes from finance, HR, supply chain, IT, parts of operations, and a very, very small part of our commercial front-end organization as well, i.e. in support of sales. Good examples of end-to-end processes, I'll probably provide you with two of them. The first one would be our source-to-pay process. You often hear of a procure-to-pay process. We've extended that to source-to-pay. That includes 5 distinct areas, starting off when we receive from our customers an opportunity to produce a product for them. We translate their requirements into a bill of materials. That would be sort of set of services number 1, and the front end of the process. The next piece that we do is we quote on the various components that comprise that bill of materials. Thirdly, we do the product data management associated with the full product. We then purchase for that product, and then we do all the payables as well in an end-to-end process. A second example is what we call opportunity to cash. Again, many organizations have more sort of narrow processes, including order to cash. In that particular process, we actually, first of all, we do all the credit management associated with the viability of customers. We do the proposal development work for deals as they come through the commercial organization to us. We do all the receivables work, etc. And I suppose if I back in there's also the order management component as well. So you can get a sense, these are end-to-end processes within what would have been historical functional towers. We've basically turned the organization on the side, established global process owners to oversee these end-to-end processes. And when it relates to the second part of your question around value, it truly is being able to look at these processes from an end-to-end nature. When one looks at issues that maybe payables is experiencing, we can now look up the full value chain of that process and identify within our own teams what's causing those issues. And there's a much greater line of sight to issues within the organization. It allows us to be that much more efficient and effective, and certainly the results are showing. So that probably would be, the ultimate goal is to be very outcome-based in all of our thinking, have a process outcome in mind, and being able to look up and down the full end-to-end process, crossing historical siloed barriers, and we've been very, very successful in really extending the full value chain farther than the typical definitions that one would expect. Hopefully that's giving you a bit of a flavor for your question.
Thank you, Rodney. Bob, one other audience question that I'll direct to you. I'm sure you get this a lot. What are the pros and cons of outsourced versus in-house, and centralized versus regional? What are the typical criteria your clients consider when making those choices?
Let me see. Outsource versus insource. Often, I mean, you have to run the actual business case on it, right? But typically it's, can I get enough scale? If I can get enough scale on my own and I'm committed to the innovations and the focus on the processes and the services, then captive often is, the insourced approach is the way to go. If on the other hand, I either don't have scale, and scale can come in the form of volumes, and it can also come in the form of talent, right? To be able to focus on an area. And my organization, it tends to be more focused on the core, and the SG&A functions is not where they want to focus. And if that tends to be their mindset, then the outsource option becomes probably more attractive to them. So in many cases, you may not be surprised by this, but it's almost a cultural affinity as to where the organization wants to take their focus on these. And then of course it has to be supported by a business case, and you have to run a whole business case to see where over a multi-year period, what your economics look like for this. On the, do I put them into, I think your second question was more around a shoring type of a question, right? What do I keep localized versus what do I move into maybe a global low-cost hub and things like that. I would say those predominantly focus on, well, the characteristics of the process itself, in the sense of, can the process be, does it require localized interaction, or can it be segregated away from that? And does it require a language that might be required on a more localized level? And or are there particular regulatory requirements, like a tax process where I have to have tax knowledge on a localized basis, tax planning, things like that. Those will drive you towards more of a localized versus a consolidated, centralized, lower cost hub type of a location.
Yeah. Bill, what has been your experience with that at GM?
Yeah, thanks, Anshul. So, just to take the example and make it real, at GM, we have a dual-pronged approach. So we are both outsourcers and insourcers. The organization, let me take finance as an example, right? The organization took a call 3 years back and qualified activities as either tactical/transactional and or core/value-added, right? And account payables, account receivables, etc. We're seen as tactical, transactional, and then we have outsourced that. And the activities which are core, F&A, are kept in-source because they are considered core. In HR, for example, payroll, timekeeping administration, compensation benefits administration, that is all outsourced. But human resource, contact center, questions are, employee handling, employee questions, and policy elements, those are insourced. So that gives us a very good blend, a good mix of both outsourced and insourced elements. Basis the type of activity, just as Bob was saying, basis the type of activity, we have classified what should be insourced and outsourced.
Great. I'm going to move on to the next discussion topic around processes and customers. And Richard, I would like to begin with you. I think as all of you are describing, as your customers are changing, their requirements are changing, as digital is becoming more real in their lives and yours as the enterprise, how should GBS organizations be thinking about processes and methods differently? So what are you doing around process design and customer experience enhancement? What are some lessons learned that you could share?
Yeah, great. So I think the customer focus has to be front of what we do. I mean, we exist in order to serve our customers. So the first part of that is, therefore, what do the customers want? Are they interested in cost reduction? Are they interested in simplification? Are they interested in centralization? Are they interested in higher value roles, strategic or business value type roles, not so transactional? Are they interested in cost reduction or removing some headcount in some way, or moving work from, I don't know, France or Israel to a center? So what are their needs, and also what is their experience? Are they happy with what we do? Or do they see any problems? And it may be problems in the service that we're providing, or it may be a problem in the process that we could get our process improvement team to work on. So it's staying close to those customers. And of course, the first step of that is identifying who they are, because really it can be overwhelming, because you're really doing almost everything in the company from a back office, even in some cases you are interacting with the customer, so the or the end customer. So it's really identifying the team. Who are the key customers? Maybe it's the executives, or maybe it's the GPOs, maybe it's subject matter experts, maybe it's the head of the different towers within the business, who are or the different members of the executive team. And then it's who is the right interface with them. So at Hitachi, we also we are the BPO to some other Hitachi companies. They come to us for shared service when they want the Hitachi culture. When that's important to them, then they'll move some headcount over to our centers. And so it's identifying who who are you serving and what their needs are, and who is the right individual within shared service to interact with that customer. So it can't be me, for example, and all of the customers. It has to be maybe the head of the order to cash interacts with the GPO of order to cash, or maybe it's when we talk about data analytics, so we have a business intelligence team. Now that team, who are they interacting with? Who are their key customers? So it's creating this matrix. It's determining a cadence of interaction. It's making sure we don't lose track of our customers and what they're focused on. So it's a lot of education. It's a little, I would say, for some people it's uncomfortable to go out and ask the customers, how are we doing? But it's something that has to happen.
And Richard, as you're doing that, as you're going beyond, going to ask customers about how you are doing, are you going beyond surveys? Are there other methods or tools that you're using? How are you gathering that input?
Yeah, we do surveys from time to time. We did them for early on in shared service. We did them annually. We haven't done them in a couple of years because we found the response rate was lower, like less than 20%. So they're typically quarterly touch points. Sometimes they're annually if they're higher level executives, but typically they're quarterly. Some people, maybe a GPO or a subject matter expert, might be more frequent than that, maybe monthly. But we're asking them, and then we're, as a shared service team, as a leadership team, we gather and review what those responses are, what the problems are, what needs to be escalated, what problems are ours versus what problems exist in the company that we might need to help facilitate and coordinate. So it's and unfortunately they're not email, they're not survey. It's hard work. You have to meet with people and discuss it with them.
Rodney, if I can turn to you on a similar question around process. You talked earlier about the role of GPOs in your GBS organization, process mining capabilities. How are you using the GPO role to enhance value of the GBS organization? And there is an audience question that I will tie into this as well. Is did you introduce the GPOs first to the GBS model, or after you got into the GBS model?
A great set of questions, because sometimes I think that we've done things a little bit differently to others, albeit I may stand corrected. And the model that we ultimately adopted was that the GPOs are that second tier of leadership within my organization. If I be the first, they are the second. And so if I go back to sort of the startup of the organization, after myself as sort of member number one of the organization, the 5 GPOs were the next group of people to be hired, and they have been with me through the full journey, and together we've plotted the course for GBS soup to nuts. They have rather unique responsibilities in that they've been the folks who have both built their teams, so they've built the teams, they ultimately lead and manage the teams on a day-to-day basis across the global footprint, but they've also been the people who've been developing the end-to-end standardized processes, documenting them, etc. So their roles are fairly broad, and they are both managers of people as well as process optimizers, if you like, which I think is the part which may be a little bit different in our particular case. But for us, I think we find that it's worked particularly well in that these folks are managing the people who are doing the work on a day-to-day basis. They've got that ability to look up and down the end-to-end process, because when you've got a team of, we've got close to 1,400 people now within our GBS organization, and they report up to these 5 people in one form or another, recognizing that there's various sub-processes and service offerings that comprise the organization. They're the people who string this all together, and they're looking up and down and looking for the opportunities to add value. They bring to our various levels of governance their insights so that they can share the opportunities more broadly with their organization. We have a process advisory board. So for each one of the GPOs, they have a process advisory board of senior executives who represent the historical functions from which the work has been taken, and they're taking forward ideas, showing opportunities for optimization, feeding back ideas for continuous improvement and the like. Then we've got another level of governance, which we call our process user communities, which are if you like, super users of our processes, and they're facilitating up to 40 of these, what we call pucks, on an ongoing basis. Again, working with our user communities around how we can improve these processes, etc., and truly, getting the dialogue going, at the coalface, so to speak. So our GPOs are absolutely critical in our success story, and very much part of the leadership structure of GBS itself, albeit a lot of the work that is within the end-to-end process falls outside of the GBS space and gets performed by our clients, which is our vernacular for internal customers.
Thank you. I think all of you have talked, as you've talked about the various topics, one thing that keeps coming back is the importance of talent in the context of GBS and how it can add value. Viral, let me turn to you on that particular question. When we were looking at SSON's State of Shared Services and Outsourcing Industry report from last year, resourcing for new jobs and new skills was identified as a top challenge. As you've kind of made the journey in GM on this path to GBS and then adding value through technology and so on, what new skills or new jobs are being created in your GBS organization, and how are you planning for those?
Yeah, thanks, Anshul. Very interesting. Earlier I spoke about make versus buy, and there was a capability where we said we would essentially buy. When it came to other capabilities, robotics, process, etc., we decided to make our own. Now, that is not to say that we would design robots ourselves. That's probably better and easier and frankly cheaper done off the shelf, even if it's the off the shelf customization, specific to your processes. But subsequently, once you have the bots in place, as the needs evolve, as processes change, and we know processes change continuously, to be able to maintain and further develop and tweak the programming of the robots, or indeed to cross deploy robots, to do that through outside parties or through consultants or even through the OEMs from whom we have bought the robots would be very expensive. And therefore, we are creating our own internal cadre who would be able to do that. Now, these are not people who are dedicated to the task of maintaining and programming and developing robots. These are people with day jobs, but they are from within the processes where these robots have been deployed, and we are training them. And we are investing significant amount of time and effort in training them. So, for example, earlier this year, we had people come from all over our service centers, and we have service centers, our GBS service centers across Brazil, Mexico, here in the US, Poland, India, and Philippines, and we congregated about 25 of them here in Detroit for a couple of weeks of very intensive, extensive training from the OEMs that we purchased the bots from to make them capable for this. We have another session coming up in June, and looks like the uptake on robotic process automation is so much that we probably will want to do this on a quarterly basis. But we will soon have a reasonable, sizable chunk of our GBS workforce, automation literate, to be able to do the activities that I described. And then eventually, at some point of time, should we reach a minimum threshold, and if there's critical mass, we are not shy of redirecting and repurposing some of these people away from their day jobs to be able to do these robotics related items on a dedicated basis, because the need is going to be there. Processes will change. We will need to evolve the capabilities to higher levels, and then the same bot can be cross deployed. I mean, to me, robotics is the answer to the classic peak and trough conundrum. Do you staff for the peak, or do you staff for the average? And the robots can take the peak off in transactional processes, but then be repurposed and redirected towards doing other things for the remainder period of the year.
Great. Richard, similar question to you. As Viral said, they're kind of training, retraining people to do some of these new things. I think one of the other challenges that GBS organizations run into from a talent perspective is this balance between the specialist and the generalist. I would be curious to hear about Hitachi's experience on kind of your journey from a talent standpoint as you progressed on the GBS value chain.
Yeah, so I think because we, like I mentioned before, because we started 10 years ago, when we initially transitioned work to our centers, and as we transition new things, maybe other departments, for example, or other parts of finance, you typically put a very qualified person on that process because there's a lot of process improvement and problems that need to be fixed with the initial launch and stabilization of the process. So for example, we had college graduates with 2 or 3 years experience would be the people doing AP processing or AR invoicing, which, maybe they're overqualified to do that, but there were so many problems with the process, we had to put people who really were good thinkers and who could solve problems. Then as the process stabilizes, we would downgrade those positions to lower skilled positions. And today we find that we don't need college grads for many of the things we're doing, especially the transactional work. And those, by the way, are the processes and the roles that would be most appropriate for robotics. And so so there has been a change in our labor force over time. That's also allowed us to control inflation because a lot of the low-cost markets have high wage inflation. And so we've been able to remove cost from shared service with the downgrading of those roles. Now we're not, when we downgrade the roles, we're not really saying we eliminate that person. We move them on to higher value tasks. So they may do that transactional role for a year, the process is stabilized, and now they're able to do more business insights, and we can move them to a different role to leverage their learnings of Hitachi and or move them on to a new process that's just come over into shared service. So the workforce is changing, and each market is different, and sometimes competition comes in and steals a chunk of your people. So, but turnover for us is very important to monitor turnover and keep in front of it, and not incur cost increases to retain the people, but really offer people good career paths, a good place to work, a great culture, provide them with value in their careers, that what they're doing is valuable and they can see their career growth. And I think that helps us attract and retain great people.
And I think what both you and Viral are describing is the importance of having this training engine, whether it is from a technology standpoint, whether it is because of the nature of the work in your GBS organization is changing. You need to have the ability to train and retrain your people with these new skills. I'm going to try and get through a few more of the audience questions before we wrap up. And Bob, I'm going to direct this next one to you. The question really is about with the advance of intelligent automation, RPA, as these technologies are advancing so rapidly. What is the question really is do we still need BPO and outsourcing, and what is the impact to BPO contracts?
Well, you don't need traditional BPO in the same way. I mean, what you're finding is the market is very much going to bifurcate. I mean, you may get the traditional BPO, which was sort of a your mess for less and a lower cost labor market. And by the way, you could do that the same way with an internal captive. That's going to start to go away as you begin to automate these processes. And what you're tending to find is that companies are very much getting their arms around automating the purest of the transactional pieces of this. As they're getting into more of the judgment-based processes, they're starting to move to the next class of what we call digital labor. So it's not just RPA, but more cognitive type thing. So that'll be the next horizon to be able to go after. As it relates to the outsource providers, if you're a traditional outsource provider just providing lower cost labor, in India or the Philippines or some other place such as that, you're going to be a dinosaur. That doesn't mean that there isn't going to be a class of outsourcers who are going to be creating more of these platforms upon which you can take advantage of that. And so I think that goes back to the strategic choice I talked about earlier is, do I want to invest in myself? And I think, Beryl, it was you who mentioned that, not necessarily the coding, but the things like the use case and the operational and the governance aspects of digital labor and cognitive and intelligent automation, all of those types of things, you're maintaining in-house. And, I think you're going to have a question as to whether or not you want to do that in-house or whether or not you want to use an outsourcer provider for that. We're getting a lot of questions among our clients around, if I'm going to use an outsourcer provider for the digital labor, questions like, am I going to get locked into their platform, or am I going to have an interoperable platform that allows me to be able to mix and match? Because what you will tend to find off of these things is you don't just pick one software. Even for KPMG, we're using this for our own sake. And we're mixing and matching basic RPA for swivel chair, workflow, screen scraping with more advanced cognitive type of solutions. And so you'll find that you're going to need some of that flexibility. So your Insource, if you're asking the Insource outsource question, make sure you ask the am I getting locked in question too.
Great, thank you, Bob. I think one thing that that you probably heard from all the panelists today is in the GBS world, whether you're starting off on the journey or whether you're well on it, change is here, change is coming, and it behooves you to adapt to that change. It's coming in the form of technology, it's coming in the form of how your customers engage with you, it's coming in the form of value that you need to bring to your enterprise, it's coming in the form of talent. So as I was thinking about that, I am a huge Game of Thrones fan, and I was reading a book about business lessons from Game of Thrones. I'm sad to say, but that is a thing. And one of the more interesting analogies the author draws is how Daenerys Targaryen tricked Krasnus of Astapor, and for those of you that don't follow the Game of Thrones, my apologies, and basically took over his army of the Unsullied. Now, he relates this to Netflix and Blockbuster. And if you haven't guessed, Blockbuster was like Krasnus and Netflix is Daenerys. They were both aware of the disruptor. They were both aware of the change. They could have allied with the disruptor, could have pre-empted the disruptor. They chose to ignore it. My advice to you as we wrap this up at the end of this panel is adapt the disruption, adapt the change that is coming to your GBS models. Do not dismiss these technologies as fads. Do pilots, do proofs of concept if you have to learn, adapt, implement, scale, and change your GBS model. One of the taglines in my favorite show says, the age of wonder is upon us. It truly is if you're in a GBS organization today. And I wish you, along with my panelists, I wish you luck with your GBS endeavors. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Brad to wrap this up.
Thank you, Anshul. And unlike Blockbuster, the businesses just can't resurrect themselves like Jon Snow did in the Game of Thrones. So a great presentation, a good analogy for those of you that track Game of Thrones, which I do. And I heard a lot of the same key points that Anshul just mentioned, particularly starting off. Rodney said, what's disruptive now may not be disruptive tomorrow. So, change is kind of a temporary pain that we have to go through. And also saying that, hey, maybe you don't have to go at this. And we've heard this from several of the sessions, as a headcount reduction exercise when we're talking about robotic process automation or any type of automation for that, for that matters, but refocus people on more insightful work. Which is easy to say, but also requires some upskilling. And I think that point came out as well with Richard at Hitachi, that we've got to start shifting skill sets, which requires a lot of training, nimble training in our organizations. And and Bob pointed out at the end that this may dramatically change the traditional BPO models that we've become accustomed with today. That the traditional low-cost labor outsourcers may in fact become dinosaurs. So a lot of potential shifts in our global business service models to stay on top of. Again, a very good session, and thank you, Anshul, for moderating, and thank you, Richard, Viral, Rodney, and Bob for participating. We've got our next session coming up at 2 o'clock. We're going to hear from Cindy Peckrell at Turner Broadcasting. She's the deputy controller there, and she's going to tell us how to transform finance on the cheap. So tune into that for some budget-conscious ways to make big changes at 2 o'clock. Rochelle, anything else we need to cover before we close out?
Well, Brad, thanks to you. Thanks to Anshul, Bob, Rodney, Vero, and Richard for excellent discussion today. Always love when we can end with a great tie to Hollywood and the Game of Thrones. What a perfect analogy that was. My last reminder will just be that following the session that Brad's just announced, we will have the chairman's takeaways from the entire 3-day conference. So join us for that from 3 to 3:15 Eastern Time and get a recap of everything, the sessions you attended as well as the ones you may have missed. So with that little last announcement, thanks again to everyone who's listened live. And this concludes today's webinar.